who described humans as verbivores. If you are what you eat, he explained, then people are verbivores, which was his way of saying that people live by words and by story. This month is a celebration of ancient stories. Why do we tell the same stories again and again for millennia? Why does it matter to us that we hear the stories told? It's not like there's a new surprise ending. Rather than a nail-biter whodunit, these ancient stories instead move through us, like our hand following a familiar banister in our house. We know where we are going, and the very familiarity can bring reassurance and comfort. Amidst the turmoil of a deadly pandemic and a fraught political transition, we once again tell the familiar stories. From faithful translations to imaginative poems, songs, plays, and pageants, we retell the stories, immersing ourselves in their familiar form and symbols. What stories do you retell? What stories feel like your favorite pair of jeans or the gloves that fit just right? As a religious tradition, Unitarian Universalists embrace many different stories as sources of religious insight. As we do so, we seek to carefully honor the peoples and the cultures who are the caretakers of each story. Today, we tell the Hanukkah story, a story that may be deep in your bones from pre-memory, or one of which you are vaguely aware from passing displays of Hanukkah menorahs and dreidels in the store. Admittedly, I come to Hanukkah as an outsider, as someone raised not within Judaism, but within Christianity. What I will share today comes from a place of learning, not expertise or personal experience. Should I err, please let me know. And should I offend, please let me know so that I may apologize and learn. Earlier, we heard a poem, "We Shall Forever Celebrate Light," by Suzanne Sarbansky, that offers one telling of the Hanukkah story. In short, it recounts how the Maccabees, led by Judah and his brothers, led a war against Antiochus, leader of the Greek Seleucid Empire, which had control over Israel at that time. When the Jewish fighters won the war, they reclaimed the temple in Jerusalem and wished to rekindle the eternal light, but only had enough oil for one day. Miraculously, the light remained lit for 8 days until new oil could be found. The poet Sobrinsky writes, Hanukkah, the festival of lights, it is a joyous celebration of our journey from darkness into brightness, the telling of a story we all know so well. In short, Hanukkah is a story of resistance, deliverance, and celebratory rededication. Lighting the menorah recounts a time when Jewish identity was under threat and survived. And our wonderful Time for All Ages by Rabbi Katie Allen reiterated that same message. And, like every ancient story I know, the details reflect a more complex situation. And reading different sources about the Hanukkah story, I was not surprised to discover variances in what is present, what is emphasized, and what is left out. How we tell our stories matters. Ascertaining truth in ancient stories is complicated. One path to truth seeks to determine historical accuracy, but the passage of time can damage or destroy original texts or material sources, thus creating incomplete or absent archives of knowledge. Time also shifts cultural contexts and how we use language, understand story, text, and history. Additionally, we here, as people living through an era of so-called alternative facts, can appreciate that even people living through the same events do not always agree about what in fact is going on. Imagine then how complicated determining historical accuracy can become thousands of years later. Even so, the stories agree on much. In the time of the story, the Seleucid Empire ruled over the land we know today as Israel. They were the most recent empire in a series of political powers who sought to claim this desirable bridge of land between Asia and Africa. Although rooted in Greek culture, the capital of the Seleucid Empire at this time was in nearby Syria. Antiochus was king. Furthermore, the Seleucid Empire advanced the presence and the practice of Greek culture and religion in the land of Israel. Now, the divides in the stories begin. While many stories simply emphasize the fight by Jews against Antiochus and the eventual victory, a 22 PBS article by Zachary Green points out that some Jews had embraced the changes brought by the Seleucid Empire. They liked gymnasium and Greek philosophy and some of the gifts that were brought. But not everyone agreed that this embrace was a good thing. As Green explains it, the Maccabean Wars began not with a Jew killing a Greek, but when a pious Jew who disagreed with this embrace of anything Greek attacked and killed another Jew for attempting to offer a sacrifice to a Greek god, as the newly revised law demanded. In this retelling of the story, it is a violent friction within the Jewish community that begins the war, and it complicates the story. And yet the endings remain the same. The Seleucids are defeated and the temple rededicated. The story of the miraculous oil would emerge in later texts and traditions than the story of the war. For those focused on historical accuracy and textual sources, this later edition might raise an eyebrow. But I want to suggest that here, as with many ancient stories, there is another kind of truth that may matter more than flawless historical accuracy. This is the truth of our need for hope amidst difficult times. Returning again to the poem by Sabrinsky, we clearly hear this hope in her poem. Speaking of the story of Hanukkah, she writes, "And it gently reminds us that this journey out of darkness and back into the light is one which never ends. We will repeat it again and again and again." Here is a truth that transcends centuries and cultures. Living as we do in a world beset with conflicts, calamities, and cruelty, we all face moments of darkness. We all find ourselves in places of confusion and uncertainty, pain, and perhaps even despair. And yet Hanukkah promises the journey will be back again into light. The light will be rekindled. The darkness will be driven back. The suffering will recede. The retelling of this story again and again and again reminds us of this hope and of this truth, that our lives are marked by both darkness and light. In the poem's final stanza, Sabrinsky returns to this theme, writing, "This holiday reminds us, darkness lives ceaselessly at the edge of the light. Yet light has strength and the power to overcome darkness. Our people have always had the strength to overcome the darkness, and even in the darkest of days, we shall forever celebrate light." In Sabrinsky's telling, the Hanukkah story brings hope not by promising a final vanquishing of one's enemies once and for all, but rather by offering hope that again and again and again, the light of liberation will overcome the darkness of our travails. Darkness lives ceaselessly at the edge of light. We may not be able to ever remove darkness entirely from our lives or our shared world, but we can move to overcome it with pools of light. We can overcome darkness by relying on the strength of the people to rededicate themselves again and again to the miracles of trust in a time of anxiety, hope in a time of despair, and faith in a time of cynicism. Light will keep darkness at bay when we rededicate ourselves to the miracles of wholeness in a time of fracture, courage in a time of fear, resistance in a time of oppression, peace in a time of violence, and love in a time of hatred. To me, these commitments speak to all of us and to this moment. In too many ways, darkness threatens to eclipse our hope. At the very least, our candles may be flickering amidst the drafts of despair wafting through the news. Again and again, there are stories of hate, of fracture, of violence. Again and again, there are stories of rising death tolls, cynical lawsuits, and unjust and unequal outcomes for Black and brown lives too long oppressed in this nation. And if these were the only stories that we told and heard, if these were the stories that we fed upon, who would we become? Instead, we tell the ancient story of Hanukkah's light refusing to go out. We tell the Christmas story of a birth of a baby promising liberation from darkness. We tell the story of Yule and celebrate the winter solstice as the days slowly lengthen. These ancient stories remind us that while darkness may dwell ceaselessly at the edge of light, so also does light remain. These stories convey a truth about how the strength of the people can also bring hope and rededication to write another chapter about love, about justice, about life. While learning more about the Hanukkah story, I also learned something else about Judaism. In every congregation, a light burns ceaselessly above or beside the Ark of the Covenant that holds the Torah scrolls. Called the Ner Tamid, for many this eternal light echoes the light in the temple whose rekindling Hanukkah celebrates. For me, the symbol of this eternal light that does not go out is breathtaking. While the darkness may exist ceaselessly at the edge of light, so also is the light ceaseless and eternal, never going out. This is a story worth retelling again and again and again. So may it be. Amen.